Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to week 3 of our HIV Prevention Education Summit. My name is Dr. Tashina Reeder, and I am the director of the Community Health Training Alliance. And this year, our theme is It Takes a Village. Building community and health advocacy. I am thankful that you've decided to spend an hour of your time or 90 minutes or so of your time this afternoon to hang out with us for our day 1 of our 3-part training this week entitled The Necessity of Village Building for Body Autonomy, Health Advocacy, and Equity. So today, day 1, we're going to be focusing on village building. But before we get started, I would like to provide you with a few housekeeping reminders as we go along during the presentation. So for starters, the chat box has been disabled. However, at the direction of our facilitators, you will be asked to participate in an activity where at that time the chat box will be open for you all to respond as directed. After the activity, the chat box will be closed and you can ask all of your questions in the Q&A box. We want to hear from you, so feel free to ask your questions, your thoughts, and all of that in the Q&A box. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce to you today's not printers, but presenters. And so I'm going to pass it over to Davlin Hill.
Thank you, Dr. Reeder, for that introduction to this 3-day webinar series. I'm really excited to be a part of it with day 1. And so if you will give me a moment, I will pull up our PowerPoint, and then you get to hear from all of us as we introduce Speaking Down Barriers. So just give me one moment. Also, I should mention that a couple of us are experiencing some possible disruption with service because of storms in the area. So if one of us leaves mysteriously, that's probably what happened, and we will get back as soon as possible. So please give us some grace for that. Though I would love to be able to control the weather, have not yet figured out how to do that. So we'll just have to do what we can for that. So we are excited to talk about multi-ethnic village building today. We are from Speaking Down Barriers, which is an organization in upstate South Carolina, developed about 8 years ago as Poetry and Conversation. And a group of mostly Black poets and a white church came together to start having conversations around race that used first-person narrative as the way to have that conversation. Over time, we moved from Poetry and Conversation to the name Speaking Down Barriers to be able to expand our focus, talk about all the things that separate us, and also to encourage diversity, but not just diversity for diversity's sake, but the belief that the things that make us different can actually be sources of strength instead of sources of contention. And so we've been doing work along the diversity and inclusion. We continue to work in the art space. We believe poetry is super important, so we'll even be using some today. And that is who we are. So let's get into it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Naomi Simmons, and I'm coming to you from Irmo, South Carolina. I just want to give you a little information about the mission of Speaking Down Barriers. So very broadly, our mission is equity for all, and we have 2 foundational avenues for reaching this very important but very large goal. And the first is end oppression. So we really focus on areas of oppression, whether they be racial, economic, related to gender, sexual orientation, wherever there is oppression, we are working to end it. And also, we believe very strongly in valuing everyone. We don't have to agree with everybody's perspectives or opinions, certainly, but we believe very strongly in valuing the human dignity that every person brings to the spaces in which they interact. And so together, we rely on both of these to reach our mission of equity for all. And we're really excited to be here today.
Thank you, Naomi. At this time, first, I'm Ashton Lee. At this time, we like to offer a land acknowledgement. It's a statement that pays respect to the indigenous people who live here and who have had their land stolen from them by colonizers. It is only the very first barest step in what we can do to support indigenous people today. The following acknowledgement of what to keep in mind as we participate in this digital space is written by Adrienne Wong of Spiderweb. Since our activities are shared digitally to the internet, let's also take a moment to consider legacy of colonization embedded within the technology, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet, not available in many indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect indigenous people worldwide. I invite you to join us in acknowledging all this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship. At this time, I'd like to honor the land of Ohio, where I currently reside, the ancestral and contemporary territory of the Shawnee, Potawatomi, Delaware, Miami, Peoria, Seneca, Wyandotte, Ojibwe, and Cherokee peoples. The name Ohio itself is derived from the Iroquois, Ohio, the great river. And I also like to honor the land of South Carolina, where Speaking Down Barriers is located, the unceded land of the Cherokee, Catawba, Saluda, and Edisto. Many folks use this land for hunting and shared water resources. The image shown here is a view across North Georgia from Blood Mountain. Reverend Scott Neely, a Speaking Down Barriers facilitator, shared in Cherokee legend one of the homes of the Nanahi, the people who live anywhere. That's the spirit people who help lost travelers find their way home. I like to offer, just find some time to honor the land in your communities, and it could look like maybe taking a moment of silence or just getting involved to support indigenous peoples. Thank you.
So we just wanted to take a moment to introduce ourselves individually. And also if we could open a chat as well, we'd love to know where you're from, where you're zooming in from, and if you know the people who were the original inhabitants to the land, we'd love it if you share that as well, along with sharing your hopes for today. What are your hopes for this particular webinar? So where you are zooming in from, the people of the original inhabitants of the land where you are, if you know that, and then your hopes or wishes for today. And so, like I said, I'm Davelin. My pronouns are she and her. I live in the upstate South Carolina. I'm the executive director of Speaking Down Barriers, along with the facilitator. As a facilitator, I'm also a poet and a painter. I am all about some collective liberation.
Hello, hello, hello. It is me, Ashton Lee. I am from Spartanburg, South Carolina. I will always rep the hometown, but I currently live in Dayton, Ohio. I am a facilitator with Speaking Down Barriers, and I am also a poet, healer, this community, changer, liberator, all those things. I'm glad to be here with y'all today.
And again, I'm Naomi Simmons. So I'm currently residing in Irmo, South Carolina, outside of Columbia. I'm originally from Northeast Pennsylvania in the Pocono Mountains. And my background is in sociology, and I am a passionate, dedicated change maker. So I'm really excited to do this work.
My hopes for today, as we talk about multi-ethnic village building, is that folks will get excited about it, both seeing the challenges and also the opportunities for expansion and growth for us individually, as well as for wherever you're located in that small kind of village, and then the larger village of this country and the world. Like, believe that change is possible. And so I'm excited about having this conversation. Naomi and Ashton, if you have any hopes or wishes for today, I'd love it if you'd share as we give folks time to share in the chat what their hopes for today would be and where they're located.
Hope for me is that everyone can take, that one nugget, that one nugget that they're going to have to, to add that change, to add that change in their lives and also just in their communities. And it can just be a small action, So my hope is that nugget.
Yeah, I hope too. I'm really excited for what we've put together, and I hope that at least one thing, but hopefully lots of things resonate for people, or resonate in a new and different way. I love having conversations about things that I feel like I already know, especially because I want to know it in a different way and think about creative and different ways to put it into practice in my daily life. So I'm really hoping to inspire some of y'all to be able to do that today.
Thanks, y'all. I think also at the end of the webinar, we'll try to remember to put a way for folks to find who the original inhabitants of the land are. There's a website you can look up and see where you're located, and then give some information about possibly the indigenous people that lived on that land. Because I realize not everybody has had these conversations or had the opportunity to even think about what land acknowledgements are and how they prepare us to be more equitable in the world. So.
Okay, let's hop right into it. I'm going to share a little bit about Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson was a famous athlete, singer, actor, and activist. He grew to fame during the time when segregation was legal in the United States. Paul Robeson used his platform to stand for injustices. He's also known as a hero for his leadership and dedication to civil rights, to the advancement of Black people. Gwendolyn Brooks, poet, inspired, wrote this poem, Paul Robeson, as an ode to his legacy of community and unity. So I am going to read this poem, Paul Robeson by Gwendolyn Brooks, and I hope later on today, if you find some time to maybe look up Paul Robeson and Gwendolyn Brooks and just read about their lives. That time we all heard it, cool and clear, cutting across the hot grit of the day. The major voice, the adult voice foregoing rolling river, foregoing tearful tale of bale and barge and other symptoms of an old despond, warning in music words, devout and large, that we are each other's harvest, we are each other's business, we are each other's magnitude and bond.
Whenever you, oh, sorry, Naomi, whenever Ashton reads this poem, I feel like, what? It's like channeling all the folks. But it made me just think about Paul Robeson and his like true belief that we are each other's business and magnitude and bond. And he was like, nah, I'm not gonna even do this work that I'm supposed to do. I'm not gonna be active in my work until there's more opportunities for people who look like me. And that is a huge, like, just thinking about village building and advocacy, like, I'm not gonna take all the privilege and then watch folks suffer. No, I'm gonna make space. So I really appreciated that. And it like, you made me think of that, like, oh, this is what village building is.
Mm-hmm.
I was just chiming in to say, I love your reading voice, Ashton. So thank you. And you just made every word of that resonate. And the piece, like Devlin's saying, that we're going to highlight here about village building is really significant in this poem about, we are each other's business, even if we not always in a bad way, but I mean, we have to be a part of the things that we're all doing because we're all interconnected. So I really appreciate that poem. I'm just going to give you a little bit of shared language for us to use as we process through this discussion. We're going to be talking about village building, and we have operationalized village building as creating meaningful connections that create and nurture belonging and help people access resources through advocacy and care. Village building can also help us develop strategies and work toward collective liberation. We kind of created this definition of village building from this piece, Flipping the Script, White Privilege and Community Building. And something that really stuck out to us about the definition of community building from that piece that has informed us in our work on village building is the role of the non-physical aspects of community development. So we can think about a lot of people and places, but we also want to think about the connections and the relationships that are part of building community with and between one another.
Thanks, Naomi. As always, so think about how you kind of pull those things together, not only the kind of conceptual like village building in a heady way, but also like, hey, it's actual physical stuff that matters, resources, people having what they need to survive and thrive, and we need each other for that. And so that gets us to this, why village building, and what does it matter? Like, why do we even need village building at all? Why can't we just, if we take a determination as far as what people say in the United States for, what you need is just to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You need to get it together. You have what you need, just go out there and get it. And then we see that that is not necessarily the case for everyone, that some people don't have the boots nor the straps, and that some of us are born with, and we have 50 million pairs of boots and we can choose which one we want to wear. And so I think that village building becomes necessary because of, I feel like I needed a trumpet sound. Thank you. The history of racialized oppression. So though there's books written, a gabillion books about, okay, well, what is racism? And we have boiled it down to something simple, but it is still very complex and there's lots of nuance. So we simply say that racism is power for the sake of greed. And when it boils down to it, it's the resources for greed and power. People getting all of the resources, hoarding them, and then telling other people that they need to work harder and get it like they did. And then using those things to create more access for people who look like them while cutting off folks who look differently. And so it started out, it has not always been a thing. We have not always been white and Black. There were different ways of people organizing themselves, and they were organized previous to Bacon's Rebellion, which is in the 1600s. People were more seen from where they were from. And there was the skin color, the pigmentocracy, the using of melanin, all of that to determine people's social order was not a thing. But during Bacon's Rebellion in Jamestown, when poor white folks, Black folks, and enslaved folks kind of worked together and bargained to be able to, if they were able to come alongside the militia that was created by Bacon, then if they were able to win, they were able to get their freedom and be able to have land. And even though Bacon's Rebellion was ultimately successful, the events in Jamestown, they were like, oh, wait, hey, the landowners, the elite were like, I'm so fearful that the people who are indentured servants, the slaves, the enslaved folks, the poor white folks will get together and they will change the system, and we can't have that. And so in an effort to get superior status in economic position, they shifted the strategy for maintaining dominance. And they started to heavily rely on importation of poor Black slaves, of enslaved folks, rather than necessarily using indentured servants. And the first time that white and Black starts to appear, it starts to appear in Virginia when the landowners began to use the legal distinctions. So if you are white, you can have some land and have some privileges, whereas if you're Black, you're now part of the enslaved class. And so you have no privileges and no body autonomy. And so that's when that distinction starts to happen. So yeah, they enacted laws that just kind of started to strip away people's rights. And this is the hierarchy that we see now. We see at the top of the triangle, the people who have the most resources, the people who have more access are white, sometimes that being European, although we know that whiteness and European aren't necessarily the same thing. And then it goes down to at the bottom where there's Black and African. And so at the bottom of the hierarchy, the people have the less privileges and experience anti-Blackness as a thing that goes all the way up through the triangle, through the pyramid. And when I look at this, I also think about the standard American, white, male, heterosexual, able-bodied, and each one of these areas can increase one's level of oppression if you're not at the top of the hierarchy. And so when we think about why village building, why we need people, it's because you need access, right? We need access to resources, we need access to opportunities, and sometimes because of the history of racialized oppression, we don't get the same opportunities because you are incentivized for how much you believe in this particular way of working. So the more I believe in this as a white person, the more I'm privileged, the more I have access, the lighter my skin, the closer I get to whiteness, the more opportunities. And so where does this come from? All power for the sake of greed. Landowners saying, I don't want to lose what I have. And so we need to shift what we think and let's create basically a caste system. That is huge. It's like all of that wrapped up into some decisions making by powerful people deciding that Black people are not going to be superior, but they're going to be used for exploitation of labor, and then to build what we have, and we'll build a solid white middle class. And then once folks gain their freedom and begin to have, hey, happy Juneteenth, as folks gain their freedom, then there's still you still don't have the same access. It's still using that same exploitation of labor to continue the growth for a few people.
I so appreciate that history lesson. And as my co-facilitators know, I've shared with them before, but will share with you in my very white and ethnocentric historical upbringing, I had never even learned about Bacon's Rebellion and didn't even understand or think about the complexity of, our slave system in America wasn't just a poof, it happened. It was so intentionally created and also intentionally solidified at major historical points. And one of the really big takeaways for me learning more about Bacon's Rebellion is that, when poor white and Black folks banded together and tried to build a coalition to take down the colonial oppressors, the reaction from those rich white people was to get more entrenched in the racial caste system. And so to me, something we really learned, especially when we're talking about multi-ethnic village building, is that if the people in power's response was to double down on the caste system, then our response in present day in order to break down the oppressive hierarchy and structure is clearly to push back against that caste system, because the separation of people and making people feel as though you gain something by being better than another group of people is so detrimental to our goals of equity. And certainly when we're talking about village building, we have to understand how that hierarchy operates. And like Davlin pointed out, not just in terms of race, but in terms of all things that give people privilege and power. And so how are those how are those cohesive, how are those centralized within that structure, that hierarchy? We wanted to share this passage with you as well. This is from a work called Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. So I'll just read this to you, and I want to draw your attention especially to the last line. So, in their craftiness, wrote Douglass, urban slaveholders and shipyard owners forged an enmity of the poor, laboring white man against the Blacks, forcing an embittered scramble for diminished wages, and rendering the white worker as much a slave as the Black slave himself. Both were plundered, and by the same plunderer. The white slave and the Black slave were both robbed, one by a single master and the other by the entire slave system. The slaveholding class exploited the lethal tools of racism to convince the burgeoning immigrant poor, said Douglas, that slavery is the only power that can prevent the laboring white man from falling to the level of the slave's poverty and degradation. And I just hear that and think about that when the white folks of this society decided, you know, after this rebellion and during this time period to tie the power of whiteness to the continued oppression and pushing down of people of color, you see that so played out here, rather than, you know, understanding the ways in which our humanity and our dignity are tied together, became a fight for who was not at the bottom. And as we're thinking about village building, we really need to, you know, think about the ways in which any of our privileged positions are privileged at the expense of other groups who are being marginalized or oppressed.
Was so good. It made me think, because, you know, part of the reason why Bacon's rebellion even gets started is because Bacon is like talking to the leaders of the time, saying, look, we are constantly under attack from Native Americans, from indigenous folks, and we need for you to do something about it. And because he didn't do something about it, Bacon's like, fine, I'm going to form my own militia. And so even in that, there was still like, let's get together, but let's get together against these other folks. And so I'm like, okay, well, I see you, Bacon, responding by like trying to get everybody together to coalition build. But what it would have been like to also get together with the Native folks, with the indigenous folks, and say, what can we do? How can we have how can we have something different? I know that's pie in the sky thinking, you know, for me, but I'm like, what would that solidarity have been like to actually forge complete solidarity? And that's what you made me think about just there. It's like solidarity is the answer, but it's more like, let's go with everyone and not try to exclude someone to say, no, you can't have your land. It's like, but you've come here and you're taking from me. So yeah, just a thought.
This is great. This is great. Thank you, Naomi. Same for me. Is I learned this too. It's a new history lesson for myself. So thank you, Dablin, for giving us that, you know, historical like background for everything. And because of all this racialized oppression, it's created several things we have. And this is just a small list, really, of the many things that it has created. Of course, we have white supremacy. I mean, that's just embedded in everything, and all day. It's a part of our world. The privileged American, everyone, I do believe, at least from my experience, you know, that one privileged American, you know, you may know many, but you know, they can navigate this world pretty easily. They don't have different things taken away from them. They can just move about in society freely. Isolation, you have unequal access to resources like Flint, Michigan, right? Violence by the state, the names that I can recall now and can keep going and going and going. Marginalized community creation and generational trauma. We all have been witness to these atrocities, and social media it's a constant reminder of these things. I mean, you can't get away from it, and there are those of us that experience these oppressions daily, you know, multiple ones, or some all at, you know, just one time. So it has created the need for communities to take care of themselves. And that still goes into why we're building this here, this multi-ethnic village building.
So we wanted to just kind of take a moment to just do a facilitator share, to kind of share our own personal story, a short story about how village building has mattered in our lives. So I'm going to stop the screen share so you can kind of see us and have a little break from the PowerPoint and for us to just talk for a bit. So I want to share my story is about third place. The third place being idea that There's another place besides home and work that we can be involved in. That would be a space for village building. So for some folks, their third place is church or synagogue or a local place where they volunteer, Boys and Girls Club. There's all kinds of places that could be a third place. It's the investment of time, energy, and resources and the shared community aspect of purpose that makes the third place. And so for me, third place has always been a place of village building. Currently, that's with Speaking Down Barriers. It's my third place. It is work, but we also have spaces built outside of that that include poetry and art and building that have become third place for me. The purpose of getting creativity out in the world and using creativity as a means of healing and restoration. And so for me, that's been part of the village. During COVID, folks from Speaking Down Barriers, I had COVID, my whole family did. And the way that people supported me, not only with meals, calling and checking in, but also encouraging me to continue to take time off. Because sometimes I'd be like, I'm ready to get back. And they're like, nah, as your village and community, we say, don't do that. so like thinking through that. So the third place means a lot for me as an unpartnered person without children. Having a third place, having that village meant a lot to be able to survive something, that was really hard and could have been really worse without the village, in addition to just loving life and being able to have people involved in that as well. So yeah, love to hear from one of you all next.
Yes. Thank you, Davlin. Let's see, for me, it's gotta be virtual spaces. I have just kind of built a great community around virtual spaces. Whether they'd be on Facebook or Instagram or Clubhouse. And it's like I have these friends from all over the world that I never expected. I know one main like virtual space for me was on Facebook, and Unfit Christian, and I was able to join that community like right when I was just leaving the church scene. And so it was cool to be in a space with folks who were just, decolonizing their faith and learning again. And so that helped me with my faith. And then I was able to connect with other Black trans men on Instagram and have like this group chat and just share our experience together as we journey along. And then Clubhouse, I've been able to just experience other just artists and tap into like another group, a neuro distinct check-in where we can just check in about what's going on with us. And I don't know, these spaces have meant a lot to me, and I consider many folks from these spaces and that I've built community with my family. So it's been great for me.
I so appreciate you sharing that, Ashton. And, one thing COVID has taught us is, the different uses of and the uniqueness of our online spaces. I mean, that's how I got connected with you all at Speaking Down Barriers. And I'm so grateful for that. And y'all have become, my own little equity village. And I don't know what I would have done navigating COVID without you. I was going to share about my experience as a queer woman in the South. I'm very far away from a lot of my family members, and I'm in kind of an isolated geographic location, attempting to raise some children. And it has shown me this idea of village making has really been important, because I've really thought a lot about the people I've chosen as family. And so, your family doesn't always end up being the people that you're blood related to. We can find family, like you were talking about, Ashton, in some of the most unique and different places. And just because we're not blood related or they didn't play a role in shaping us for good or bad, doesn't mean that we can't have these really deep and meaningful relationships and have each other and support each other, sometimes for me at least, in ways that those blood relatives have not come through. And I've really had to get to a place of peace and acceptance with that, but also just highlighting for myself the joy in it. When you can choose the people to surround yourself and choose the people that that really see your authentic self and appreciate you for that authentic self, I think is so powerful. It is such, for me in my life, has been such a blessing for my kids to see, like, you can choose the kinds of people you want to have in your life, and they should be the people you're choosing because of things that shared values and for who you are. So that's been a really important piece of village building for me.
Thanks, Naomi. I want you like little heart for both of you. So good that we are right here. This is a multi-ethnic village building right here in this space, that we all have community with each other and have been able to be a part of in each other's lives. And it is, one of the greatest blessings of my life for sure, to be involved in community with you both. So we're going to go back here. Oops, hold on. Alrighty. I'm so glad that the storm did not deter our meeting at all and has not caused any problems. So thankful for little small things that are super cool. We've had a lot of feels. I don't know if you have, but it was a lot of feels. So, if you wanted to take a moment to breathe, Naomi, you want to help us out?
Yes. Sorry, I was already breathing on my own and wasn't paying attention that I had said I would help us breathe. So, okay, so we've just shared all these things. We've, had our brief revisit of the history lesson into racial oppression. And so we just wanted to take a breath. This is something that's very important in our practice in Speaking Down Barriers offerings in general, and that we think is very important is, as we engage with difficult or deep or meaningful conversation, to just pull back for one moment, check in with our bodies, and take a deep breath. So everyone just, you can kind of close your eyes, roll your neck, make sure you're not holding tension in your shoulders. And we're just going to take 3 good deep breaths. So whenever you're ready, kind of close your eyes, soften your focus, and take a good deep breath in and let it out. Another one in and out. One good one you feel all the way in your belly. Let it out. So earlier this year at Speaking Down Barriers, we read a book called The Sum of Us, and we really love so many aspects of the book. And there's one that we really wanted to share with you all to help inspire you to think about what Heather McGhee, the author of the book, calls the zero-sum game of racism. So I'll read this and then we'll discuss a little bit about what the implications are for multi-ethnic village building. For when a nation founded on the belief in racial hierarchy truly rejects that belief, then and only then will we have discovered a new world. That is our destiny. To make it manifest, we must challenge ourselves to live our lives in solidarity across color, origin, and class. We must demand changes to the rules in order to disrupt the very notion that those who have more money are worth more in our democracy and our economy. Since this country's founding, we have not allowed our diversity to be our superpower, and the result is that the United States is not more than the sum of its disparate parts, but it could be. And if it were, all of us would prosper. In short, we must emerge from this crisis in our republic with a new birth of freedom, rooted in the knowledge that we are so much more when the we in we the people is not some of us, but all of us. We are greater than and greater for the sum of us. And I just think it is so powerful. There's an example in this book that Davlin always likes to bring our attention back to about these racist white people who were so just doubling down on the racial caste system, that they were willing to drain all of the public pools that they were benefiting from in order to, not have to integrate. And when we have this thinking about, that racial hierarchy where we're willing to focus on the ways in which we each can get ahead by climbing and stepping on the backs of the people beneath us and keeping people below us, then how can we be a true sum of our parts? How can we be a we the people? And how can we be a multi-ethnic village? We really need to think about those pieces of it. So I found this really powerful. I love to come back to this quote.
So true, Naomi. It's like when we think about the response to COVID and the response to even HIV and AIDS epidemic, it was like to call out folks and make certain group responsible and say, no, this is your fault, or we're going to ignore it because it's not affecting all of us. And then all of a sudden it affects all of us. And there's, we can do all this research and provide medications and this change. But what about that time period where people weren't willing to do that? And it was like multi-ethnic village building was over happening. People were like, we got to take care of ourselves because nobody's coming for us. And so we've got to take care of us as we are, just dying without hope. And so then people start to counter and be with people in their suffering and to provide as much help as they could while we were waiting for medications that could have been available way earlier, had people really paid attention to the sounding of the alarm. And I think the same thing comes with COVID. It's like all this stuff is happening. We're like, oh, well, we take this big response. And then it's like, well, whatever. We're just going to let it happen. Have whatever happen. And now it's like, well, survival of the fittest. Like, but what if we had multi-ethnic village building and we're really concerned about people who were, like myself as a person who has disabilities? It's like, I got to stay in the house. So, who's supporting, right? And then how can I support other folks? How can we build? And so, yeah, the pools is an example. We got so many examples of people just like, man, it doesn't affect me, so it doesn't matter. Or if I can't have, you can't have. Or I want to have, I don't want you to have any of that power for the sake of greed. It goes back to. I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, I love your soapbox. And also it makes me think about, I love the little part about, that we could use diversity as our superpower. I mean, we have so much of it, and it's this thing that we have, and it's this resource that is so easily available. And it's kind of like we teach kids at a young age that it is their superpower, and then at some point we start stamping it out, and that's so disappointing, especially when we're going to start talking about, the importance of having villages in our adult lives, and this real big gap that we have intentionally created in between.
Let me hop on in. We just discussed pretty much the why, so now we're gonna dive into the how. So let's talk about it. Like how can you build your multi-ethnic village? So at Speaking Down Barriers, we make multi-ethnic village building a priority. It is our path to fulfilling our mission for equity for all. Our ED is a Black queer woman, and we have strong people of color like on the leadership team, board and staff, and have a strong white allyship of people who share their power and privilege and the work to dismantle white supremacy and oppression. Collective liberation only happens as we engage in the work together, believing that none of us are free until we are all free. We build spaces for sustained community engagement using a model of community agreements, breath work and self-awareness through intention setting, and poetry, which utilizes storytelling and creativity. So here we go. Our community agreements. This is what we have created here. Our community agreements at Speaking Down Barriers. We use these to build a container for dialogue. These community agreements help to accomplish our mission, of course, saying it again, equity for all, bringing into focus how we relate with and engage with one another through valuing everyone and ending oppression. This begins in the way we have dialogue. As you can see, these community agreements, the focus is very much based on the individual and collective responsibility. we are responsible to show up and offer presence, be aware of what comes up for us, challenge biases, and also hold each other accountable for respecting each other and allowing bravery to lead us. At each gathering, we talk through these community agreements, and then we ask verbally the people, they assent to this, to all the following. And so, like, for example, like if a situation arises, we bring people back to these community agreements. For example, when someone is not using the space equitably in the way we are sharing, like we remind people to be mindful of how much or how often they are talking. So we can go to the community agreement right here. I will value people and share the space equitably. That's what we do to kind of bring people in if folks kind of go astray from them. But these set right here, it helps us, and it just, I don't know, it just kind of puts everything together. When I look at our community agreements, it's just, I see all of us. When I read it, I see us all.
Oh, I love what you just said. That's such a good way to put it. It makes you feel like you're part of it. Like there's a space for everyone, and that it's going to be a space where we can have, good conversation with each other. Yeah, be in space with each other. Thank you for that. Another thing that we do at Speaking Down Barriers in terms of our village building is we use a process of grounding and intention. So we engage in grounding and intention in all of our offerings, and we engage in grounding and intention in all of our work with our participants as a way to recognize and understand that our bodies carry our stories, and that it's important to take time to notice how our bodies are reacting, to notice our breath, and to help us pick up on habitual practices that we are engaged in and make new choices. So how do we show up and be present and be focused and able to be committed to our community agreements if we are not noticing the ways in which our bodies are carrying with us things that have happened in our day or things that have happened in our lives in general. Something else that we think a lot about in our village building with our grounding and intention is that, what happens when you walk into a space where you're the only one, whatever that may mean, or you walk into a space where you're about to have a conversation that you're nervous about or that you haven't had before. You're going to be engaging in some discomfort. Noticing how our bodies react and doing grounding and intention helps us kind of slow down and gain a sense of presence in the moment and in the space. It really helps us prepare to be in community that values and respects each other by having the presence and the grounding in our minds and bodies to engage in meaningful ways with our whole selves.
So we talked a little bit about the beginning that we started this poetry and conversation with Speaking Down Barriers. And so we continue to use poetry and storytelling and art as a way to push conversation forward, as a way to get out of our logical brain, to hit our emotions, to really kind of bring out what we're actually feeling in a moment before we've had the opportunity to talk ourselves out of it. And so this is another part of our multi-ethnic village building because, many people, maybe you've never heard the story of someone who is in the LGBTQ plus community and the things they've experienced, or maybe you've never heard about the impact of racism on Black girls, or maybe you haven't heard people deal with like how the N-word comes up in their mind and heart as a person who is white, and they sometimes have to battle that back. All of that can come out in a story, in a poem, and really cause us to evaluate our lives and move forward in a multi-ethnic village building. And I would just like to share a poem for you all, and just to give you a little piece of what it's like for us. And since our theme today is village building, this poem is called Beloved Community, so it's kind of fitting. So I hope that you'll listen with your heart and hear, and I hope that it is encouraging to you. It uses as a start a quote by Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Our goal is to create a beloved community, and this will require a qualitative change in our souls, as well as a quantitative change in our lives. So here we go. We, us, Black, white, brown, human, gathered like oaks, pines in a forest, women, men, non-binary, transgender, gender expansive. Are, is, state of being, the image of God we shine like constellations in the galaxy. Beloved, be loved, one who is loved, taken care of, needs met, heart filled, accepted, forgiven for inaction, and not fighting for the least of these, and still being the beloved. Community, I am because we are, sharing the cup, being the body, binding each other's wounds in places we cannot reach ourselves. We are the bride. God calls us woman, exalts woman, asks us to become woman, to receive all of our good, to enter into relationship. We co-create, expand, thrive. All things become shared, humanity, flaws, and all. Love made visible through flesh. Beloved community loves all, endures all, because we do it together. Like trees gathered in the forest, like wandering lights in the night sky, who create constellations, binding each other's wounds, loving the least of these, because each of us is the least of these, and the image of God, be beautiful, at times bruised and broken. Beloved, be loved. We are the beloved community.
Yes, yes.
I love that poem. Thank you for sharing your gift with us, Davlin. I love that. I am because we are. Oh, that hit me. I love that. All right, so we've shared some ideas from what we do for village building in our own organization, but just to give you some other ideas and things to rely on as you work in your own village building. Some key ingredients are trust, mutual risk, and the community agreements that Ashton highlighted are really important when we engage in mutual risk, and then also vulnerability. Stretching, so whatever zones you're in, stretching into those discomfort zones or stretching through those fear zones. Initiative, conflict negotiation. If we don't have conflict negotiation, we can't sustain the villages that we build. And strong boundaries, making sure that in order to engage in all of these things together, we know where our limits are and that they are agreed upon as a community.
So we want to share with you a little bit about this multi-ethnic village building community, Freedom Inc. And the start with the co-directors, one who's a Black woman and non-binary person, and a Hmong woman. Hmong, let's make sure I say that properly, at the start of Freedom Inc. And so we're going to just play a little bit of this video, and we can add that in the chat as well in a moment. So if you wanted to see the extended video, you'll be able to. We just wanted to give you a little picture of what their work is like.
Saying they're for. One thing that they're saying they're for is Cops Without Schools. And they are for real investment in Black and brown youth. Like, it is not. I grew up in Milwaukee, and the place that I grew up is, they recently did a film about it, a documentary called 53206, because it talks about it as the worst zip code in America in terms of crime rates, unemployment rates. I identify as Black. Being Black is important to me. It's a big part of me and how I move through the world and interact with the world. Being Black and not African American is political, right? It's about identifying with other people of African descent all over the world. I feel greater kinship with, greater identity with a Black person in Jamaica than I do a white person at the Capitol. I also, in terms of my gender, I identify as gender nonconforming. I don't conform to what society says a person with my body should be like. And also for me, I see myself as identifying with people who are masculine, identifying with people who are feminine, and feeling identity and sameness with both. So for me, I really feel like a blend of those things.
Oh, look, this one I was in a pageant.
Oh, Mama got first place, I think.
Yeah, they're all older now. Oh, here are their plane tickets. Ooh, you guys want to touch it?
Whoa, these are plane tickets.
Right here, look. Yeah, these are the plane tickets. Look, the actual receipt. February 27th, 1980. I was born in Laos, right at the end of the Vietnam War, or as we know it, the American War or the Secret War in Laos. And at that time, it was at the end of the war, so my mother was very malnutrition, she was very sick, and when she had me, I was very sick. After that war, we had to leave because many of us fought against the government along the side of the US. And so that's kind of the beginning of my life, fleeing before we came to the US to resettle in the US. Growing up in a very traditional Hmong household, there are very specific gender roles. But earlier in my teen years, I think that's when I was awakened, and I tell this story a lot. But it was this particular moment where we were having a family ceremony, a family gathering, and all the women would cook and then prepare the food, and all the men would eat first, and then the women would eat second. And I just remember as a young teen, like, oh, let me just go into this tiny kitchen and let me start. And I started eating. And as I was eating, I'm like, I'm going to eat for my sister. I'm eating for my mom. I'm eating for my aunties. I'm eating for everybody, right? And I felt that sense of justice, like this was what justice must look like. And I've always felt that was something that I fought for. And that I think that's been my life learning in creating like a Freedom Inc. Hey everyone. Creating an organization or a space or a place where I felt like I didn't belong anywhere else, I'm gonna, instead of trying to fit into something that wasn't meant for me, I'm just gonna create it and see what happens. Yeah.
Freedom Inc., our motto is our community is our campaign, because we're not issue-based. We're people-based, we're community-based. So we are fighting every issue that's impacting our communities.
Just wanted to kind of show that video to just talk about the ways of being people-based, using your community to then focus on what work you want to do. It's like, what issues are facing the village that I'm in, and let's work on those, right? It doesn't have to be, I'm going to work on this thing or this thing or this thing. It's like, no, people in my community are suffering because of lack of access to food desert, like a food desert. So let's figure out what we can do. Let's build a community fridge. Or people are experiencing illness or can't get out to get their medicines. Let's do that. Let's be people focused. And so I really appreciate that about what Freedom Inc. is doing.
Thank you, Dablin. I always learn so much. I pick up something new, just watching certain videos over again, and certain things will just come to you. I'm like, oh, we need to think about this. So we're into our next thing here. Another let's talk about it. What are some obstacles to village building? Of course, there's going to be obstacles with village building. So I'm gonna throw out a few things, some obstacles we may have, such as assimilation, having to speak a certain way or dress a certain way. It can go into, elitism, whitewashing, I know I feel like I experience this a lot when it comes down to like watching certain things and movies and stuff. And it's just like, I'm not seeing myself or people within my community, just represented, erasure, also just harm. We work to dismantle these obstacles to get to a better us together. I don't know, is this a chat time and people can like share some of their obstacles?
Yeah, I think that'd be great just to kind of open the chat as we're going to continue on. But if folks want to put in some obstacles they maybe think about for multi-ethnic village building as we finish up the webinar, that would be fantastic. So please, if you
Great.
want to share those in the chat, we're going to keep moving, but we would love to hear your thoughts on that. So what are some benefits to multi-ethnic village building? We looked at obstacles and those are real for sure, but there's also benefits. And some of those that we've come up with, seen in our own lives, also some places where we've read about some of these benefits, but there's support, less feelings of loneliness because there's less isolation. I can call up people in my village. And so it's like, oh, I'm not alone in this world. There is access to resources or opportunities. As we know, people who have the opportunities usually open them up to people who are in community with them. Oh, I heard about a job, or I heard about this, or heard about that. And if you're not connected, you don't hear. And so how does that happen in multi-ethnic village building when you have all people with different places in society? And so they have the opportunity to tell you about what's happening. I also just want to point out collective liberation again, because none of us are free until we're all free. I love Audre Lorde and bell hooks and Res Momentum kind of are some of the background thinking to what we brought to you today. And they all talk about collective liberation, that it's going to take all of us to get where we want to get, to create a world where everybody has what they need to survive and thrive. And we're going to continue to talk about in our further sessions, health advocacy. Like when your village can advocate for you and for your health, that's huge. And when you can't speak for yourself because you're having a hard time and you're in the hospital or you're in this situation, you need people to kind of step up and be your advocate. Well, if they're part of your village, they know what's going on. And so they know how to step in and help you in that and to achieve that place of equity and liberated freeness and happiness and joy that we're all after.
I can't wait for that piece of the conversation too. It's such an important one. So as you're still thinking about some of your obstacles to village building and reflecting on some of these benefits of village building, there are hopefully many takeaways that you will have. But just in case you want some guidance on what we hope that you're going to take away from this conversation, the first is thinking about bonds of friendship and kinship that you already have, and thinking about how to nurture and expand them to create a village. The second one is thinking about where there is a third place that you are involved in your community that you could use to strengthen connections that already exist or that need to be strengthened. And then the last one, again, from the Gwendolyn Brooks poem, we just really love this phrase and hope that it inspires you. We need each other. We are each other's harvest, magnitude, and bond.
This brings us to the end of our webinar. We wanted to kind of make you aware that speakdownbarriers.org is our website. And so you can come to our events. We have a link tree and there's most of our events are free and open to the public. And right now they're still online. So we're still doing virtual events. We'd love to have you. Thank you so much for participating and being in this space. We really appreciate it. And we are going to hand it back over to the Community Health Training Alliance and Dr. Reeder for a question and answer period.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you all for your presentation. As you guys were sharing, I had that moment when I was thinking about how appreciative I am of you all and how thoughtful your presentation was, in a sense of that causes you to reflect and do some hard work of your own, but also invites you to do some critical thinking of how we could better support the movement of health advocacy in creating village, and how we can share power and our respective roles in our organization, of how we could really think about how our systems even work within that structure. And so thank you for your thoughtfulness and your sharing this information for today on multi-ethnic village building. For those of you viewing, I invite you to ask questions. I know you have some thoughts. I know you have some thoughts or questions you may have for our presenters who shared a great deal, even a bit of vulnerability of sharing a part of themselves with you all to show an example of village building. And so let's hear from you. Let's hear from you. The Q&A box is available for you to answer, to ask your questions, or to even leave a comment if you like. In the meantime, as we wait, is there any last thoughts you may have for our viewers regarding this topic?
Yeah, I was just also wanted to, I just put that in the chat, if you don't mind sharing it later, Dr. Reader, the way that folks can find out the land that they're on. I just feel like it's super important to find that out. In addition to thinking about how the land is a part of our village as well, and how we treat resources, and how we don't gobble it up like it's gonna last forever, and to consider pollution and how it affects different people, and why are different people in different places, and how that affects our village building is also important, especially with health, right? We want to be healthy folks. Being in a place where all of the pollution is not very healthy. And let's see who's living in those spaces.
Mm-hmm. Something to consider. Any last, Naomi or Ashton?
I was going to say, in order to build village, like Davlin was just saying, you need to know who's in your community. It takes an important stretching sometimes for some people, and for others, some real intentionality about knowing your community on a deeper or different level, so that you can know what resources you have in order to do that village building. But you can't build if you don't know who's there.
That's a good point. Yeah. And I was thinking too, as you guys were presenting, I know that all of us were experiencing the pandemic together when we talk about the COVID. And even for me, I believe, and maybe you can relate to this, building a community was even more important. And you had children who was homeschooling, you had parents who may have lost their jobs, and families who are all home full time now and kind of unsure how to interact with each other because this was unfamiliar, being around each other 24 hours a day. And it became stressful for many folks, right? And our mental health began to take a toll on us, not knowing how to manage our time, working and managing family, how to find kind of respite, if you will. But I think for some folks also, it became an issue of shame, having to be vulnerable to ask for help. And it didn't always feel good to be vulnerable for some folks to create that village because of the shame they may have felt because they were in this space when perhaps they were used to being very fiercely independent. And so it was a lot for many of us, all of us during this pandemic. That's why I believe village building is important, especially around health advocacy, not just for ourselves, but for our parents, our children, our neighbors, our friends, and all of that. So I think this period we've been have taught, if anything else, it has taught us having support is important.
We definitely need each other, and it proved that the state is not enough. It's like, sure, we can have resources from the government. That's great. But we actually need the people in our community, because the state cannot respond to all of the things. And our states, our actual states, can't respond to all the things or won't. And so how do we kind of build this together? And thinking about health, a lot of people just think about health when it starts to affect you. No, that was my issue. It's like, I never thought about health until I had the personal problem. Then I was like, if I'm having these problems, what about all these other people? And you can't just wait till I'm, experiencing kind of things that have to do with old age. That's not the only only thing. People are getting sick all the time. And so, like you just said, how do we advocate for healthier lives and access to, the best healthcare? And it's not based off money. And how do we take care of each other?
Yeah, definitely something to think about, and kind of really structure our own narrative around community building, what that will look like for us or each of you who are viewing, listening to this convo. Any thoughts? Someone comment in the chat must be in agreement with what we're saying. Thank you, Tamara. Any other thoughts or questions? Chime in. We would love to hear from you. The video that was shared was posted in the chat. So if you wanted to watch the video on your own, you can click on the link in the chat box to do that. Okay. So there is one question. If one left behind, we can all, I'm sorry. If one have left behind, we can live all ones that great. Am I reading that correct? I have glasses and still can't see.
No, I think that's correct. That's what I read too. That I hear you saying that if one is left behind, we're all left behind. And so how do we take care of the folks that are left behind so that we all move forward together? But if I'm incorrect, please just say, nah, that's not what I meant. This is what I meant.
Someone raised their hand. So Geneva, are you want to, I guess you raise your hand saying that's correct, or you can comment in the chat if that was a correct reflection of your thought. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And so I hope that you all did as well who are viewing. And so if you want to hear more from Speaking Down Barriers, this was day 1. Tomorrow will be day 2. So be sure to register. Unfortunately, I don't see any links in the chat. So we can cut and paste it back in, or if you scroll up, you may see it. But if not, we will try to put it back in the chat so that you can access the link.
Yeah, I think it just says hosts and panelists. So,
so here, we put it back to everyone. It says everyone in the chat. All right, we're going to try this again so that you can have the link.
Okay, I got you now. Ready.
Thank you for putting that out. Let us know if you see the link. Here's the video link. So as Dav is putting in the links in the chat box again, I would like to invite you to come back and join us tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. for day 2 of this 3-part training on village building. And tomorrow the focus will be on, what's the focus on, Dav, tomorrow?
Health equity. It's called Health Advocacy and Equity in the Village.
Ooh, that should be a great conversation as well. So be sure to register. Go to our website, fight.org, and you can find all of our offerings for our webinar series for the Prevention Summit. To register to join us tomorrow at 11 a.m. for day 2 of this 3-part training. Someone said, great presentation. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. And so if there isn't anything else left to be said, I thank you all, presenters, Davlin and Naomi and Ashton. Thank you for your time and your sharing. It was great being among you and listening. I took notes myself. I said, I need to kind of think more about that myself. So I thank you for sharing. For the rest of you, I hope that you will tune in tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye.